So today you are joining us for the keys to converting more leads. Final session in our Mastering Client Intake series. If you attended last week and you experienced the bit of the Zoom glitch, thanks for your patience. And we just sent out the recording this morning. The recording was really great because we were able to really do a deep dive into automation and spend 50 full minutes going over forms and emails and setting all those up. So please enjoy the recording when you can, and feel free to email me back if you have any questions that were not answered in that meetup. I will do a quick agenda, and then we'll meet our panelists. We'll go over some additional resources that you might find interesting, a couple polls, and Q&A. And yeah, the majority of the session today is going to be a great conversation between Billie and Michael about the keys to converting more leads, and that is why you're here today. So quickly, I'd like to introduce the panel. You probably don't recognize me, but you might know my name because I send you all the emails all the time about all of our upcoming meetups. So I organized our meetup program, and I'm really excited to speak with everyone today. If you have any suggestions for meetups, if you want to be a panelist, if you have anyone that you want to nominate as a panelist, would love for you to share in the chat, or email me at jocelynoneil@clio.com and let me know what you want to hear. We always take in feedback from the audience when we do our monthly meetups, and we'd love to hear from you so we get the content that you want to learn about. You probably recognize our other two panelists. They are client intake pros and are constantly, on panels. We had Michael earlier this month for our CLE webinar, and Billie has kindly returned again to our meetup. So I'm just going to read you their bios and play a quick little game with everyone. If I can get my polling somewhere on here, I might have to minimize my screen. Oh, there it is. Perfect. So yes, unless if you aren't aware, Michael is the strategic advisor to Clio and was previously the general manager of Clio Grow, Clio's industry-leading client intake and legal CRM platform. Prior to joining Clio, he held the role of CEO at Lexicata, which he co-founded in 2014. As CEO, he led the company to a successful acquisition by Clio in 2018. Michael has a BS/BA in business from the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, and a JD and MBA from Loyola Law School and Loyola Marymount University, respectively. He currently resides in Los Angeles and frequently speaks about legal technology and client intake, like he is doing today with us. I'm just going to pop up a fun little poll here because you might have heard that bio about Michael before, but we want to share maybe some new things that you don't know about him. So on this list, we have 2 truths and 1 lie, and I want everyone to do their best to figure out what is the lie here. What is not truthful about Michael? He was a professional tennis coach. He is fluent in Japanese, and his mother is Cuban.
I had to throw some random related things in there, right? Looks like throwing some people off.
Yeah. So there's 2 that are pretty close. So I'm gonna let this roll for a couple more seconds, and then we'll see. Ooh, they're close. I'm gonna end this poll. People are still voting. People aren't sure. They're looking at you to see if you look Cuban or if you look like a tennis player. Okay.
Do I look like I speak Japanese? Do I look like a tennis coach? I don't know how you could tell that by looks.
Tennis people are usually athletic. Okay. I'm going to share the results. Do they have it right, Michael?
They do. It was pretty close, but yeah, I do speak a tiny bit of Japanese, but I'm not fluent by any means. The other 2 are both accurate.
Nice. Well, if you do any virtual tennis coaching lessons or make your way to Toronto, I need some lessons. Cool. And I'm gonna do the same with Billie. So just briefly, Billie Tarascio is a family law attorney and owner of Modern Law, a family law firm with 4 locations in Phoenix area. She is the author of Decode Your Divorce and Tiger Tactics, powerful strategies for winning law firms. She's also a law firm consultant and founder of Modern Law Practice, an intake consulting firm for attorneys. So it makes sense that, again, she is here today talking about intake. All right, Billie, let's try this out. What do we think is the lie? She was a backup singer for Pink in the late 90s. She grew up spending summers in Sicily, and she has 4 kids between the age of 5 and 16. And I do not know the answer to this one, so we'll find out soon. And I don't, okay. We'll let this roll. Okay, I think there's one that's coming on top, but I really hope it's true. So let's see. Share results. Billie, your camera disappeared on me. Are you still around? There you are.
Yep, I'm back.
Perfect. Was the audience right?
Yes, that was definitely more of a lie or a fantasy.
I was waiting all week to figure out if that was a lie, but I'm also really jealous about Sicily. Can't say I'm jealous about the 4 kids.
You're right.
Okay, cool. Thanks for playing along. Hopefully you learned something new about Michael and Billie, since you probably know a bit about them, but there's some fun facts for you. Okay, so I'm going to pass it off to our client intake experts, and they are going to have a conversation about Billie's keys to converting more leads to clients. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now, and you two can take it away.
All right. Thanks, Jocelyn. I also was very sad to hear that Billie was not a backup singer for Pink in the 90s. I feel like that could have been true, and it was too accurate to not be true. So I'm sure everyone in the audience feels the exact same way as I do. So I'm excited to chat with you. You and I have obviously spoke at numerous conferences together, but we haven't done a panel together. So I'm really interested to chat with you and everyone in the audience. This is going to be largely conversational. I know we've done a lot of very structured presentations before, and those are super helpful. But I figure you've got two people with, probably 25, 30 years worth of intake experience here from both a high level and from inside the firm that I think you could get a lot of value of. So I think there's going to be a lot of conversational stuff. Billie does have some materials she's going to share with us about her own process. What I'd love from you is your help. As I'm kind of running through and asking questions, I'm sure you guys, plenty of times I've been on webinars where questions pop up in the back of my mind, and I'm like, I wish I could ask them, but they're not going to stop and actually answer that. Well, you're wrong this time, because we actually will. So as I kind of ask things and dive deeper, I'm going to go through my own line of questions. But if you guys have additional questions that you want me to ask Billie about her process, or things that I've learned over the years of seeing tens of thousands of, hundreds of thousands of intakes done through our platform and through Clio, I'd love to, obviously give my 2 cents, but see from your guys' perspective as well. And you can also ask questions about the Pink fantasy if you want as well. So first off, just to kind of introduce, because some of you out there know Billie, some of you don't. Billie, why don't you give us a 30-second overview of kind of your history? Where did you kind of start in law? Did you always run your own firm? What practice areas? It sounds like family law is what you specifically do. How did you settle on that? And then we'll kind of jump into some specific intake questions.
Okay, all that in 30 seconds. So I became a lawyer in 2005. I was very interested in family law going into law school. And coming out of law school was very interested in a new business model, a concept of limited scope, pay as you go, lower cost. There was already very much I was very aware that there was an access to justice gap, and thought that was a market opportunity. So I've essentially spent my entire career experimenting with that. And it's been fascinating and fabulous. And I have been wrong more times than I've been right. But the process of experimenting just has been so fun, and I've learned so much. And because experimenting with intake is probably one of the probably the highest impact experiment you can do with your firm, I'm absolutely passionate about it.
Okay, awesome. Cool. Well, thank you. That was 30 seconds on the dot. So I appreciate that. So Were you always running your own firm? You came out of law school in 2005. Did you kind of just start and build your own firm, or did you start at another firm as like an apprentice, like a first year?
So I got married in law school and had my first baby in my third year of law school. So immediately I knew I didn't want to go into a traditional position, and worked for probably 4 or 5 different law firms, everything from solos all the way up to larger firms, larger being a relative term. I was in Eugene, Oregon, so not really large, and just absorbed like how they operated as a contractor, which was a super efficient way to get exposed to a lot of different ways of practicing law. But no, I was never a traditional associate.
Okay. And so how long before you launched your own firm?
I launched probably in 2008 in Eugene. I moved to Phoenix in 2009 and opened what is now Modern Law in 2010.
Okay, perfect. So as you mentioned, and same thing as an entrepreneur, as someone who went to law school as well, I never practiced too long because I started the business in law school. But they say you learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. So one of the best things you can do is learn from other people's mistakes. So what did you observe at those firms that made you say, I can do this better than them, I'm going to start my own thing?
I mean, so much of law is about personal relationships and relating to clients and having social skills and having the ability to sell. That was obvious to me early on, and it was obvious that that could be a strength that I utilized. I was a singer, that was a thing, and I think the ability to kind of perform is an aspect of our job, and something that I thought I could capitalize on and use, because the law part seemed easier. This seemed like more of a differentiator.
Got it. Okay. So so you started your firm in 2008, 2009, kind of a hybrid between the two. When did you first realize that like intake was going to be your different? I know you said you'd kind of observed at your other firms, but hindsight's always easier to talk about it than in the moment. And I'm sure, it's hard to see the forest through the trees. Where did you realize that you first was like, intake is going to be my key to success? I need to focus on that. Was there like a specific bad experience with a client? Was there someone who fell between the cracks? Like what kind of triggered?
That's a fantastic question. I do remember the exact moment, and it was not a single thing. It was and it took a long time. So we said I opened in Phoenix in 2010. It wasn't until 2013, 2014 that I started tracking KPIs. And it wasn't until I started tracking KPIs that I had this February, I think it was February in 2013 or 2014. And we were so busy. And I looked at my numbers at the end of the month, and we had done 107 free phone consultations. And we had signed up 7 clients.
Wow.
And I didn't know what conversion was supposed to be. I had no idea what was good, but I knew that was bad. I knew that was really bad. And we had to change. Like, how are we getting 107 consultations? Like, that's a lot of consultations, and not signing up even 10% of them.
Yeah. So Rowan, to answer your question, we just got a question. What is a KPI? So a KPI stands for key performance indicator. So basically a fancy word for your metrics or your data that you're looking at, but you want to identify a couple key ones, and we'll kind of dive into like what maybe your KPIs and what you track behind the scenes of your firm look like. But before we go there, I want to kind of dive a little bit deeper into that specific question about that 107-7 ratio. What was going wrong? Right now, in hindsight, you look back and you say, oh God, I was doing something horribly wrong. So what did you learn from that 1 month?
Well, and before we even like dive into that, can we just take a step back? Because you cannot evaluate intake or anything else without data.
Yeah.
Like, so if you don't, and so I talk to law firms all over the place about these concepts, so many concepts that in a law firm, but unless you measure, you cannot know how you're doing. And so you have to set up a system for measurement before you can even start tweaking intake, because there's a million tweaks you can make to intake. And that gets me right to where you were. I knew I had to do something. So I reached out to the people that were the giants in the industry. And so that was like Lee Rosen and it was Rainmaker Institute. Those were the only two people who really had information about this at this time. And I reached out to them and they gave me different advice. They gave me different answers. But essentially the starting point for consultations is, are they on the phone? Are they in person? Video wasn't even an option then. Now we have, are they in video? Are they paid or are they free? And and those combination of factors are going to make an impact. So immediately I knew we are no longer doing free phone consultations. Either I'm making people come in or I'm making them pay or both. And I eventually quickly, like within weeks, got to, we're doing both. So the combination of changing those things, but also simply paying attention to, am I giving intake its proper attention? I wasn't. I was doing consultations and, paying attention halfway and online because there was 107 of them. And I wasn't doing a good job at all on at all. So, charging for them, having people come in and then just paying attention to how I was showing up made a huge difference.
Okay. So a lot of good tidbits in there, a lot of different wormholes to go down. A couple of things first. 100% agree. If you are going to build, for those of you who are part of the CLE I did earlier in the month, I talk all about metrics and building a sales or intake funnel. And the problem is when you build something, you don't know if it's good or bad unless you track data behind it, right? You could say, I've got the most intricate, I've got the most intricate thing in the world, but if nobody's using it or no one's converting, then you actually have a pretty crappy process, as good as you think it might be with automation and all these different things. If people aren't going through that process, it's worthless. So completely agree. And I'll tell you this really quick story. So when we, in the early days of Lexicata, we didn't have a lot of data. We didn't provide a lot of KPIs. And that was something that we were really, really keen on doing. And so as soon as we added our first version of our report system that basically tracked how many how many leads you were getting, how many of them were converting by practice area, the amount, and so on and so forth, I had a firm call me and she was like, oh my God, thank you so much. And I was like, what happened? And she said, I've been doing 3 practice areas: criminal, family, and estate planning. And I realized and I thought criminal was my most lucrative side of things, right? And I realized that I was doing like 5x the consultations to conversion, and the clients were like half the amount of value as like family or estate planning. And she's like, I stopped doing it for a month, and my revenues went up 35% just by doing that. So it's really, really, really important that you're evaluating your numbers and keeping track of that. But I am curious, right? My first gut is like, okay, 7 out of 107 is pretty bad, right? Do you think it was just a matter of the free consultations, or was it something that you were doing in your intake process that was different? And then last thing I'll mention is, sales, especially for people who are in different practice areas, criminal, estate planning, family law, PI, there are different, what we call sales cycles, or, times to where they'll convert to a client. Did you just happen to be in a practice area where just most people convert a month or 2 later, or were those just crap leads?
Neither. I was doing a crappy job.
Okay.
Immediately, our conversion rate increased without changing marketing, without changing intake, simply by changing the way we approached consultations. We were now up at 20 clients a month, immediately. Revenues raised, big deal, big changes. And as time goes on, of course, you do increase the quality of your leads, and you need to increase the quality of your leads, but it's like you can only pull one lever at a time. Yeah. And one of the quickest levers you can pull is learning some sales skills, and learning how to do a better job in consultations, because the skills that you have and that you use when you're lawyering are not the skills that you should be using in your consultations. Yeah,
it's interesting. I always say, I'm kind of doing like a seminar on like entrepreneurship and how to start a business. It's not legal related at all. And I always say that the most important skill any business owner can have is sales, because nobody's going to sell your product or service better than you. And it's so important that that's built in. And it's funny because I've been doing these intake webinars for 6, 7, 8, 9 years now. And I remember in the early days when I used to say, like, let's do a webinar on sales, nobody would show up. I do a webinar on intake, and we'd have tons of attendees, right?
Mm-hmm.
Lawyers are kind of scared of the word sales, and they're kind of afraid of it. And more importantly, a lot of them didn't go to law school to be business people. They went to law school to be lawyers. So how do you kind of get most people thinking about, I'm going to shift my perspective from being a service provider of law to being a salesperson, and what impact is that going to have for their firm?
Sure. So, it's about the job that you have during your consultation. Your job is to determine if you want the client, weed out problems, right? Establish promoters. So even if this person doesn't hire you, make them love you. And number 3, get hired. And so the question is, how do you do those 3 things? And you do them through a methodology that is listening, that is connecting, that is high stakes negotiation skills. These are skills you will use in mediations, in negotiation, and what the impact of that, the impact of doing your consultations completely differently is you will have clients who love you, who trust you, who want to pay you. So you're getting more and better clients by doing it this way. And so that resonates with lawyers, not the word sales, but the idea that they will have compliant, paying, trusting clients.
Yeah. It's such a huge thing is that, first impressions last forever, and how you set the tone of your relationship will dictate the type of engagement you're going to have with the client, right? I've heard lawyers say like, oh, I don't really care about the consultation. They'll see how good of a lawyer I am once they start working with me. And I'm like, imagine you work at Apple and you're coming in to buy a computer and they're like, oh yeah, I don't need to tell you how good a computer is. You'll see it once you buy it. And you're like, I'm not spending 2 G's on a computer that you're not going to tell me what I'm going to get yet. So it is really important, and you will set an important framework for, are you going to get those annoying clients who call you every 3 days? I think one of the biggest mistakes a lawyer can do is not set expectations and set a framework for what their relationship is going to look like, right? I'm dealing with that right now. We're doing like trying to do some construction on the house, and contractors are a mess to deal with. And I have to end up calling and chasing them down because they don't tell me, hey, Michael, there's going to be 2 or 3 week gaps that we're going to encounter. That'll be perfectly normal. I'm on top of it. Don't worry. Just that one sentence would have avoided me having to call every 4 days, be like, hey, what's going on? I haven't heard from you. So I think it's really important to set those expectations early. So I have a good question from Russell Dombrow, who is, do you guys know each other?
Yeah.
Okay, beautiful. So Russell was asking something that I was going to ask, so I might as well ask it now, which is, you mentioned that you were going to do a paid or in person, but then you ended up doing both. Let's talk about paid consultations, and then I kind of want to dive into your specific process so we make sure we have time to dig into everything. Are you scared by doing paid consultations? You're kind of like running off some people who are interested but aren't willing to pay the fee. And then also his question is, did you end up doing paid for all of the mediums, or is there a certain medium that you don't charge for?
So at that time, we went to doing everything paid, and we also went to doing free webinars once a week.
Okay.
And so anyone who wanted to have a free consultation was invited to join the webinar. That also created content that we turned into blogs, that we turned into, so now my intake people have resources where if somebody's not sure, they can go to our YouTube channel and essentially meet each and every one of our attorneys and understand their style because we have videos. So that was how we structured it early on. Now I'll tell you, my intake team is good enough that if there is a hot lead on the phone who's ready to hire now, they can transfer them to me. And we won't call it a consultation. We'll just call it a let's get you retained. And sometimes that works. You don't want to make somebody necessarily go through a consultation who doesn't need a consultation. Sure. But that's the only time you get in without paying.
Got it. So what's your, if you don't mind sharing, what has been your progression of your conversion rate look like? And how does that compare to like the revenue increase? Are you, by doing this, are you just not, obviously I assume maybe your conversion rate went up, maybe it went down relative to the total number of leads, but you were getting better quality and a higher aggregate number. Can we talk a little about your metrics and what that looks like? And then I do want to dig into your specific process and go step by step through it.
Absolutely. So that was 2014 or 2000,
Okay.
so we have been honing in since then. And time again, you kind of come back and you look at it. One of the things I found is by looking at conversion rate by attorney, it was very, very different. And so one of the things I do now is, first of all, I trained my attorneys. And second of all, I decided some attorneys simply shouldn't be doing consults, and that's okay. They can be fantastic lawyers and not do consults. So only people in my law firm who are good at consults do consults. I watch them. There is a formula. You have to follow the formula. You have to follow the metrics. Like there's a curriculum. There's an online course that I make every single one of my attorneys and my intake team take, but that's not good enough. You have to then go and listen and critique and offer advice. But what this does is it makes for stronger attorney-client relationships. Now, you asked what should the conversion rate be, and that's a great question. So what I found is that the conversion rate should be above, it should be 50 to 60%. That's when we're doing things well, of paid consults. That's when we're doing things well. And the reason is, in family law, people aren't always ready to convert. Many people come in for consultations and they're not ready to get a divorce for a long time. And so it's not that you've lost that client necessarily, it's just that they're not ready. And that's why 100% or even 80% is not something we're shooting for.
So what about like 50%? How do you calculate? Is that in the total? Is that over a year period, the likelihood that that lead will convert? Or is that in that time that they contact you within 30 days, conversion rate with that? How do you calculate that time frame?
I love that you asked that. The way that we do it is the number of consultations that occur in a month and the number of hires that occur in a month. So we're not tracking the individuals. We are looking at, exactly, it averages out over time.
Got it. So I think that's really important based on the practice area, right? And I think it's important that some people will come to like my webinars and your sessions and they'll listen, oh, I've got to build in these automated follow-ups and all that kind of stuff. Like, you're still a human, right? And you still have a heart. You don't want to push people to divorce, right? Like sending an automated campaign of like, hey, here's why you should get divorced. It's not a good thing, right? So it's not necessarily bad that like there's a long sales cycle, but I think it is something important for everyone listening who's maybe not as experienced at you in the metrics category is when you first start tracking your metrics, your conversion rate, if you go based on the number of consults divided by the number of hires, your conversion rate is going to be really low at first because you're going to not have that built up pipeline of people who are coming back. So if you really want to track it, what you can do is you can do it based on like a 30-day cycle of how many people hire me in 30 days, because then you can do it the next month and compare it. It'll probably take a year or two before you really start to get the aggregate number where you can do the math that you're doing, where it's over a longer period of time, the averages will even out. Otherwise, there's going to be massive jumps one month or over another when you're doing it that way. So let's go into your actual process for this. I have a ton of questions. Everyone's super interested. You're the royalty of intake. And I love that you treat your firm like a business. I've been saying this for years. I coined this phrase that lawyers are people who go to law school happen to run a business instead of business owners who happen to be a lawyer, right? And I think you're the former, where like, you're a business owner who happens to be running a legal practice. Most people are lawyers who just stumbled into running a business. And there's a very distinct difference between the two, is you're treating it like you're running with data, you're training, you're optimizing, you're doing things the right way. I think too many firms are just saying, hey, go do intake. And the lawyer's not even listening to the intake calls and seeing if they're good or bad. Right. And they're wondering why their revenue is not going up. Well, if I hired a crappy salesperson, I wouldn't let them keep selling if they weren't selling, but a lot of firms will not treat themselves like a business. So let's dig into your actual process, right? And walk through this. Walk me step by step, and I know you might have some materials if you want to share them. Walk me step by step exactly what happens. who picks up the phone, what the handoff looks like, what emails get sent, why you do it that way. So let's start with like the initial meeting, how they actually interact with you, whether it's a phone call or whatever it is. Walk me through that first step up until the point where they schedule a consultation.
Sure. So people can contact my firm and probably your firm in a lot of ways. They can text us, they can fill out a web form, they can chat somewhere, or they can call. Most of the time, people are calling or texting, and texting is certainly on the rise. And I think I was telling you this earlier. My intake person had a surgery and she couldn't talk. It was on her nose and she couldn't talk. And so for a few days, she was doing everything via text, and she was amazed at how much she could get done via text. You can talk to a number of people. You know, let's say she's on a call and another call comes in. She can text that person during the call and say, hey, I'm on the other line, but I see you're reaching out and I'll get back to you in 5 minutes. It's very, very effective. So we use texting through our VoIP provider, who happens to be Zoom. Before that, it was Vonage. Zoom phones are fantastic and new and cheap. So if you haven't checked that out, check it out. So there's a number of ways that people can come in, but and they can also schedule online. So each of our bios has a schedule a consultation. On my homepage, it says schedule a consultation. So there's a lot of ways people can get a hold of us or schedule. So usually they end up speaking to a human at some point. If they do most of it online, they're still speaking to a human to collect that payment. Usually we don't have them do that online because we want to do a conflict check before we take the payment.
Got it. Okay. And are you having them read anything besides obviously submit payment? Are you having them read anything? Are you sending them anything? Is there anything that's kind of getting transacted before the consultation is scheduled besides maybe just asking some information about conflict check?
I am so happy you mentioned that, because this is something that we do not require intake forms prior to a consultation. And this is not, I don't think that we're the norm here. And people fight me on this again and again and again. But I think I want to remove barriers to getting hired. That is my job. My job is to look at the intake process and to remove barriers. And so if I've created a barrier for someone that they must do something before they can hire me, that's not in my interest. And it may not be in their interest. They may not be somebody that does intake forms. That doesn't mean that they wouldn't be a fantastic client or pay you a lot of money to do the intake form for them. So we don't require intake forms. We just require a brief description. We do the conflict check, we collect the money, and then we get them scheduled. We do a lot via Zoom right now, although people are asking more and more to come back into the office. Interestingly, our conversion rate did not go down when all consults went via Zoom. And I kind of expected it to, but it didn't. And one of the reasons is, and I might be jumping too far ahead, one of the reasons is it's almost easier for me to get people signed up on Zoom, because the consultation flows so well online to me screen sharing and going through our client agreement and getting them signed and paid while I'm in the consult. That's almost easier than when you're sitting across the table and now you're signing things or you're taking checks or whatever.
Right. Yeah. And not only that, but the ease of access too. You can do it whatever you want. They don't have to drive to the office. Really interesting. Do you have them fill out an intake form after retention?
Yes, and it's not an intake form. So we call intake forms the form that you need in order to get into a consult. And then we call the new client questionnaire the form where we collect information to write legal documents. And this is important. Like, why are you making people fill out information that you need in order to make their legal documents?
Yep. Yeah, it's so funny because I've been preaching this for years, and I just talked to you had two phrases that I said just earlier this month on the CLE webinar, which was number one job as a salesperson is to remove barriers, right? Accept check or accept credit card, like don't force them to come into the office, like do whatever's easiest for the customer, right? So that's number one. And then number two is the intake forms, right? Like what my first experience with an intake form was when I worked for the Department of Justice in the bankruptcy department, and I saw intake forms that are like 55 pages. And I'm like, do you really need this in order to retain the person? Like, or can you just do a 5-page form and then ask them the rest later, right? Like again, the analogy I always give is like going into an Apple store and they're like, hey, I want to buy a computer. And the sales associate go, great, fill out this 10-page form about your previous ownership of computers and why you want a computer. You'd be like, F off, I just want to buy a damn computer. And that's all they want to do is they want to get help. They want to feel protected and they want to feel safe. And by putting up barriers, you're making that harder for them to achieve. Do you need to know all of their information to hire them? No, maybe you need some conflict check. Maybe you need a basic thing. Fine, but I love that. Okay, so let's move a little bit through the funnel. So now they're coming in. So it sounds like you are trying to close them. And when we say close, that's a sales term. We're trying to close them on the actual consultation. What happens if they don't want to close? How do you get them to convert later?
Well, one of the things I want to understand is why, because my follow-up is dependent on why. If they are not ready to close because they are transferring money and they intend to do it later in the day or the next day, then I know when to follow up. If they're not closing because they have to talk to their mom and they're not sure, or I met with somebody the other day who actually told me she had to meet with 2 other attorneys because she needed to conflict them out. And but she really wanted to hire me. So we'd be talking by the end of the week. Well, now I know I'm following up with her at the end of the week. So it really depends. Like and if somebody's just like, listen, I'm here for information, I'm not looking to get divorced now, then I'm not following up next week to see if they're ready for divorce.
So are you using, so it sounds like you are probably setting up trigger-based automation behind the scenes and whatever you're using, your CRM or intake software, call it Clio Grow. And so are you setting up like different channels of like I have an email campaign if it's a money issue. I have an email campaign if they're just not ready. I have an email campaign if they're ready, but they need a couple days. Do you have different campaigns built in for that?
I don't. So we have a campaign built out for people who don't schedule.
Okay.
Because only about half of people who call in and become leads schedule consultations.
Okay.
And so those people we put into a funnel.
Mm-hmm.
And that funnel gives them the book Decode Your Divorce. It gives them information about our sister company, I Do Over, which is a lower cost company. It's the long-term nurture campaign. Okay. For people who are hotter leads, we're doing more individualized follow-up. Mm-hmm. And also we have a newsletter that goes out twice a month that just helps keep us top of mind, but that's not super targeted or segmented, because really, I don't know what I need to say that is so different to somebody who doesn't hire because of what various reasons.
Right. Understood. Okay. So most of your campaigns or your automation is built around people who reached out but didn't schedule.
Yes.
Got it. Okay. Interesting. So now that we're kind of going deeper in the process, so what's the thing you've changed inside of the actual consultation process? What's the thing you've actually changed that you think, right? You said there are multiple levers that can be pulled that can do different things, right? Whether it's automated follow-up, having an actual salesperson talk to them, paying for the consultation, whatever it may be. If you had say like inside the actual like virtual or in-person consultation, what's the one thing that you've done that has increased your conversion rate and made clients more likely to hire you?
Sure. So I had to figure this out when I wasn't doing consultations. I had to figure out like, why is my conversion rate so much higher than my other attorneys and how can I teach it? So I had to deconstruct it and then learn along the way. And essentially there's, a process of how do I use biological hacks, which was a lot easier when we were in person, but those are the things that can influence buyers. How do I use psychological hacks, which are ways to develop intimacy and connection quickly? And then how do I use traditional sales techniques to really understand where someone's at and move someone who's stuck to unstuck? Because a lot of people who are in family law and need family law help, they've been in their situation for a long time. They're coming to you for help, but they're stuck and they need help with you helping them figure out how to move from where they're at to where they want to go. And that might mean helping them brainstorm on the different ways they could pay. Or it sounds like what you're saying to me is, you've been stuck because you're afraid to move out, but now you have a plan. Like you have to articulate for them their emotions that have been keeping them stuck, and then help them be their best friend and help them make a plan to get beyond being stuck. When they feel that understood, now they're ready to hand you their credit card. Be like, okay, please help
Got
me.
it. So how do you, so it sounds like you're almost, at least in your practice area, and for like a PI attorney versus whatever, obviously there's going to be a lot of similarities, right? Convincing someone, hey, I'm here to help make you whole again, right? Or if you're estate planning, like, hey, I'm here to make sure your kids are protected, and I'm make sure that if something goes wrong and you have a will in place that's going to do exactly what you want it to do, so you're not stuck on a ventilator for 5 years if you don't want that. So you're almost acting like a psychologist during the consultation, and you're helping them understand what the next process is. How do you, the last question, and we'll kind of jump into some Q&A. The last question I have is, how do you bridge that gap, or how do you toe the line between like selling someone on divorce and just like being there when they're ready?
Well, okay. So I think whenever you go see a counselor, their job is to reveal the things that you're already dealing with and grappling with. No one is going to do something that they're not ready to do. And I'm not convincing anyone to get a divorce. What I'm doing is I'm reframing and I'm articulating their fears and their worries and their concerns. And then I'm providing a solution if I am that solution.
Got it. All right, so let's jump back in to some questions. So one question I got, which was interesting, was from Joshua Karsh. And he basically mentioned that they do basic intake through a legal assistant who gets some basic information. And then once they book, they send them a questionnaire, right? And the purpose, he says, is to allow the attorney time to familiarize themselves with the case. So they have to spend as little time on the paid consultation as possible. It's not really a question, it was more of a comment, but I think there's probably some lessons to be learned here, maybe some advice to be given. What do you think he's doing right? What do you think he's doing wrong? And do you think he's framing his mindset in the right way as a firm owner?
I mean, I think your job in the consultation is not to familiarize yourself with the case and come up with a strategic action plan for how you're going to represent the client. Your job in the consultation is to build trust, determine if you want the client, and get hired. So if you reframe the way you're looking at consultations, all you're doing is creating barriers and making it more likely that you're going to screw up that process, because instead of listening to this client and making sure that they know that you understand them and that you can solve their problem, you're moving on to lawyering. They're not ready for you to lawyer yet. So that's my philosophy.
Understood. Also, I will add to that, I do agree with the reframing, and he did mention something about it's not as little time on the paid consultation, but so the paid consultation is fully about giving advice. I think there are two things to add. One is, if you know stuff going in, you kind of create preconceived notions. And two is, if you are kind of thinking about the framing of these paid consultations, like, how do I get out of here quickly, or whatever it is, I think that will end up resulting in more pain down the road. And again, Joshua, if we misinterpreted your question, your comment, I apologize, but I think it's a good lesson in general for listeners of how you kind of frame your process, and whether it's more about discovery rather than just getting to a resolution, right? And I think sometimes that can kind of throw things for a loop. So another question I have from Anthony Diaz is overcoming objection for not hiring because they want to see more attorneys. How do you, so we were talking about, this is all about sales, conversion rate, all that kind of stuff. If I say, hey, Billie, you sound great, but I want to explore some other options, what do you say?
I love that. Okay. So the question is, well, okay, so I would definitely want to understand that. Are you looking to explore maybe non-legal options? Are you looking at other lawyers? Like, what options are you looking to explore? Like, make them articulate their specific objection so that you know whether or not, how you want to overcome it. If somebody's saying, I want to look at other lawyers, then they haven't connected with you. Or they have connected with you, but somewhere in their brain, they've told themselves they have to meet with other lawyers. And then you want to help them deconstruct that. And the way you can do that is by saying, well, it's very, very important that you find a lawyer who you connect with, who you feel comfortable with. And so if you don't feel really comfortable with me or with modern law, then I do think you should keep looking. And most of the time they're like, but I do
Yeah.
want to sign.
So I love that, right? And I want to spend a minute or two more on objections, because I think that's so important. Overcoming objections. Again, you got whether you're a lawyer or a paralegal or an assistant or an intake specialist, your job in intake is not really to consult. Your job is to comfort and to make them feel comfortable, right? They've done tons of studies with this when it comes to sales. People do business with people they want to do business with. They don't choose, like if I'm hiring a contractor to do a job, yeah, I might look at like their previous work they did, but really it comes down to like that connection, right? Do I feel comfortable like they're going to have my back and I'm not going to have to chase them down, right? So I love the fact that one, you're saying, hey, if you're not comfortable, go look elsewhere. And two, a really, pro level sales tip is make them sell to you, where you say like, hey, look, if you're not feeling this, then I'm not the right fit for you. And then what it ends up doing is it turns the tables where they feel almost like they want you to want them. And then they end up selling you, no, but we did have that nice conversation about our friends and we like dogs. You know what? I do like you. Let's go. So I think that's an amazing tip. And I think it's really important. One tip I used to give actually in the early days in Lexicata, we had this feature, it was a social media feature. And we found out that, if you did a little research, so rather than researching their case, maybe you should research them a little bit and say, by the way, so this happened at ClioCon. Jocelyn was talking about ClioCon. Our first ClioCon we went to, we were selling Lexicata on the floor. And we had this one woman who ran a firm came up. It was just like, yeah, this looks kind of cool. And she's like, yeah, I don't know if I really need this. And she was kind of cold. And then we pulled up the contact page and it automatically searched for social media. And my business partner, Aaron, was the one that was talking to her mostly. I was just kind of in the background. And it popped up for her that she went to University of Arizona. And then he was like, oh, I went to U of A. And the dialogue changed completely. She bought it on the spot 10 minutes later, right? People, it's all about comfort level. They want to feel like they're not going to get screwed. And to be fair, you might think you're a great lawyer. They don't know you from Adam, right? They don't know the difference between a good lawyer and a bad lawyer. They just know the difference between someone they want to do business with and someone they don't want to do business with. So I love that. That's awesome advice. What are some of the other more common objections that you hear in an intake, and how do you overcome those?
Is it okay if I pause on that question for a second?
Yeah.
Because what you just talked about is commonality. It's one of the principles of influence. Influence is a book I think everybody should read. It's by Robert Cialdini, Cialdina, or I. It will give you a ton of techniques. Those techniques are crucial to selling. People also asked for resources. That's one of them. Never Split the Difference is another fantastic book you absolutely should look at. And then maybe Persuasion. If you also, this is a shameless pitch. I have an online course. One of the courses is consultations, and one of the sections is overcoming objections. Now, there's only so many objections, and they come up again, and again. And you should have these down. You should know how you're going to respond to every single objection easily. None of them are new. None of them are unique. So you should be prepared to discuss them.
Awesome. So Rachel Lazarowitz, I believe, had asked, how do you feel about scripts?
I mean, I think scripts are fantastic, especially to start. You won't need them eventually, but you should, especially if you are, if you're working on it and you're struggling, you should absolutely have a script. And so when I'm working with my attorneys in my office, I'm correcting them. I'm correcting, hey, try to say it this way, because the way you say things matters. So I think it's a great idea.
Okay. What about paid consultations? Kenneth Gibson had asked about criminal defense lawyers requiring a paid consultation, right? Obviously, different kind of case. What's your opinion, and what have you seen in maybe some other practice areas of maybe you shouldn't do paid consultations? Obviously, for a PI lawyer where they're doing, contingency only or something, maybe they don't charge. maybe talk about the brief knowledge you have of other practice areas and how that paid versus unpaid consult might affect that.
I think that the best you can do is test it. Test your market, test your leads. It doesn't have to be long. You can learn a lot in 2 weeks. So I don't know. I don't know. I know some criminal defense different firms charge. I know many who don't. And I think that it's worth testing.
Okay. What about referrals, right? So for me, in my previous business, right, not running a law firm, but running a business, like you've talked about creating them positive impressions and making them promoters, right? So if you're doing like an NPS, net promoter score, there's promoters, there's detractors, and then there's passives, right? You're trying to create promoters. How do you incentivize promoters to promote? And what do you do? Do you like give them any kind of like, you know, I assume most people are not coming back. Well, I'm sure there are coming back for a second divorce, but in case you do other type of family law, like prenups the next time around or something, do you give them any sort of benefit? Obviously, I know there's some legalities in terms of like, the model rules of not fee sharing with non-lawyers and those types of things. How do you kind of create promoters and how do you incentivize them to come back and send more people your way?
So Arizona just really deregulated. And one of the things they deregulated is this concept. And we now have an official referral program in place. Anyone who refers us business gets $200, and anyone who was referred gets $100. So that's something that my intake person is telling every single person who calls my firm. Hey, were you referred? Because we have this referral program and we would love to thank the person who referred you. So we're spreading the word. The other thing we've done is we've gotten really official about giving referrals. So now anytime somebody needs a referral, my referral coordinator is sending 3 emails to 3 different people showing our work to these other people about how we're giving referrals. I think that referrals is more and more important as every single lawyer turns to AdWords. You have to now almost go more on the ground, more personal, more connection based, and you've got to do it in an official, systematic way in order for it to work.
So you're talking about referrals from other lawyers, right? What about referrals from customers?
Customers too. If a customer refers me business, they get $200.
Got it. Okay, interesting. And do you feel, how do you track that? Like, do you do it in a spreadsheet? Like, how do you keep track of that system?
Yes. So it's relatively new. So we've got it in a Google Sheet, and then we've got it in our Active Campaign, which is our sales kind of management tool. So, but you can do it in as simply as a spreadsheet. Even with 150 or 190 leads that we get, there are only so many hires. We're only looking at those hires, and then we're only looking at those hires that were referred by somebody. It's not so many people that you can't actually track it.
Got it. Okay. And do you build any like automation at the end of a client? Like once their divorce is wrapped, what do you send them? I assume if you send them something, are you talking about, hey, if you were happy with me, leave a review or send me a referral? What does that end of process look like?
I'm really glad that you asked that because it's easy to automate the beginning. It's harder to make sure that you're doing the end. So the end means the case has to be closed. Then my intake team, who's also my customer service team, is triggered to make the NPS call. The NPS call involves asking for a review if they're a promoter, sending them an Amazon gift card to thank them for their time, and even giving us this feedback. Every single client gets asked, and we track net promoter score over time. We look at the trending 12 months. We look at it by attorney. We look at it by firm. It's one of the 2 metrics we use to determine our bonus system at Modern Law. It's NPS and it's revenue. That's it.
So first off, you could tell you're a pro salesperson, right? That's one of the great things of not just sales, but being an engaging speaker within a conversation is saying things like, that's a great conversation, or that's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. It makes you automatically feel warm. Like 1, you're listening, and 2, that we're vibing. And so I think that's like a very simple thing that anyone on this webinar can incorporate into their sales tactic of, I remember taking like a lawyer counseling class where I had to take what's called an MPRE, where, it's for ethics. And one of the things they talked about is active listening, right? Nodding, acknowledging, repeating back, validating what they're saying. So it sounds like what you're trying to say is this, so there's no misinterpretation of a question. So I think that's awesome. Do you have any concern on that NPS aspect of being, a lot of NPS tends to be anonymous and like done via email. Do you feel like there's any skewed results by having someone call from the firm versus having like an email campaign go out?
I mean, you're not going to get the actual feedback from an email campaign. You're just not. And
Yeah.
I think most people answer. Most people answer and they give feedback. They give real feedback and they give constructive feedback. And when they're unhappy, they tell us. And the other thing is I have my team asking throughout the case as well, not asking for an NPS, but asking for feedback. Because if somebody's not happy, we want to know. And I think most of the time our clients just like the fact that they're being asked and they want me to know.
Yeah. And I assume that you pretty much never get negative reviews online. And if you do, they're few and far between, because that's one of the things that like when I'm talking to people about intake and sales and optimizing their firm and their strategies, I talk to them in a way of like, this is going to help you. But really what it's doing is if you help the client, it's going to help yourself, right? Like what goes around comes around. And so you might say, hey, it's great if I ask them feedback so they don't leave me a crappy review later. But by asking them feedback, you have the opportunity to fix it, right? If my contractor is like, hey, how are you a month in? How are you enjoying your experience working with me? And I go, to be honest, it's been okay. I really wish I had more consistent communication. Well, now instead of a year later, him getting a crappy review from me online, being like, he was okay, 3 stars, his communication was lacking, he can now start adjusting his approach for me. And hopefully by getting feedback, he maybe adjusts his entire approach for his entire business. And that's how you optimize, that's how you improve. You can't get better without feedback. So I love that you do that. So we're running out of time. I have a couple more minutes. Are you okay if we go a couple more minutes?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Having too much fun with this. So I have a question from Ann Hatton. Again, if I butcher names, I apologize. I'm an intake specialist, not a phonetics expert. How much do you charge for what length of consultation?
Good question. So it depends on demand. I recently hired 2 attorneys, and so we are in need of clients more so than we would be if we were full and maintaining. So we dropped our consult rate from $250 to $99. It makes people more likely to book a consult. When we're full, when we're pretty full, and we don't need as many clients, it's $250.
Interesting.
And it's I book it for an hour.
Okay, interesting. And when it comes to feedback, right, for your lawyers, right? I got a question, I can't remember who it was who asked, but about sensitivity, right? How do I tell, this is an anonymous person, actually, it's funny, they did it anonymous for this reason. As an intake coordinator, how do you let timekeepers know, I guess lawyers, know that their conversion rate sucks without hurting feelings? Or do you just not book with certain staff?
We share numbers, and that's part of our culture. We're a data-driven firm, and we share numbers, and they're not private. They're posted, and we talk about them every week. So that's just part of the deal. But the other thing is, like, I think your associates actually want more feedback, not less. And that's in general, that's across the board. People want feedback. They want to know what they're doing well. They want to be constantly improving, especially the millennials. They want you to invest in them. And that means they want you to critique their work and help make them better. So I don't get pushback.
Yeah.
People want my time. They want my attention. And I think they want yours too.
Yeah. I think lead by example, right? If you're a good salesperson, people want to learn from you, right? So being a manager at a firm or being a lawyer running a firm, you have to be able to get your hands dirty and actually lead by example. You can't just be a better salesperson if you're not doing any consults yourself. So I think that's really valuable. I'll also give the analogy of like being a coach, right? March Madness is going on right now. What kind of team would you have if you're like, I'm not going to tell you what your field goal percentage or what your percentage of 3-pointers that you make. it's a horrible idea because they want to know, like, should I be shooting higher? Should I be like, stop shooting 3-pointers? So by giving that feedback, you can kind of do it in an agnostic, kind of objective way of saying, hey, look, you know, your numbers are a little bit lower. Let's work on it, right? They're not bad. They could get better, and we want them to get better. And as long as you don't go at them in an aggressive way, like trying to be critical, but more being helpful, I think you're right. You can get to that right result. How do you get around pushback from people about paid consultations? I'm sure there's tons of people like, I can't believe you're asking me to pay. I don't even know if I want to hire you. Like, why are you asking me for $250?
I mean, there's a reason we don't book 100% of the calls, and sometimes that doesn't matter, you know. And if you're at a point, if you're brand new and you desperately need clients, then maybe don't charge for consults. Maybe that's a barrier you don't need.
Yeah, yeah. So I'll add a tidbit to that too, which is, I think the most important thing people can do, and this didn't matter if I was selling Lexicata, if I was selling Clio Grow, if I was selling legal services, or if I was selling, you know, ice cream to a kid, it doesn't matter, right? If you want to have a good conversation, it can't be one-sided. And what that means is you have to get whoever you're talking to buy in, right? However you get them to buy in, and when I say buy in, I mean buy into the process and buy into the experience of actually giving up their valuable time. You don't want to be on a phone call with someone who's not listening to you, right? It's a waste of their time. It's a waste of yours. So you can get them to buy in different ways. The most traditional way is through money, right? That's how society works, is we exchange dollars in exchange for time, resources, services, whatever it may be. So you're exchanging time. What you can also do is effort, right? And that's where intake forms, while they're not necessarily my favorite thing to do, that's still something that gets to them to invest time, right? So for instance, you talked about what's it called? Your intake specialist getting sick and doing everything via text messaging. And that was like a mistake you stumbled on that really increased your conversion rate. We had something kind of similar. When we were doing demos of Lexicata, we had a lot of firms come our way who, like, this wasn't Zoom, this was a phone call and a screen share, and they'd be kind of doing work in the background. And I could tell, I could hear them typing. Lawyers think they're so good at multitasking. I know when the hell you're not listening, right? And so it started frustrating me. So I'm like, I don't want these unqualified people, AKA customers who aren't that interested. So what I started doing is I started sending them a demo video and saying, I don't have time. And instead of doing an hour demo, I constricted it to 30 minutes. And I said, here, make sure you watch this. If you haven't watched this, we will reschedule our time. And what it did was it created scarcity. And there are tons of books that I'll talk about. Scarcity is what makes things valuable, right? Nobody wants gold because there's gold on every corner. They want gold because it's really hard to find, right? And so your time should be scarce as well. So by making them do that, I made them show up prepared and like ready to go. And I didn't get those people who are like not paying attention or anything like that. So by getting them to invest their time before the consult, it's very similar in nature to investing their money. Time and money are more valuable to some people than another. So I'll throw in that tidbit as well, because I think it's really interesting. All right, last question, because I know we're 10 minutes over and I know you got some consults to close. So we'll go with last question, which is following up with the people who haven't scheduled a consultation, right? So maybe you're on a phone, maybe it's an email, maybe it's a webinar, maybe it's whatever. How frequently are you doing drip campaigns? How long are you stretching that out of? And most importantly, what kind of emails are you sending? Are you sending sales emails? Are you sending just like pure content? What are you doing?
Let me see. I could show you the funnel. Is now a good time to show you the funnel?
Yeah, please.
Okay. All right. Hopefully you are now seeing this, and I'm going to play from current slide. And are you seeing the big one, or are you seeing the presenter version?
I'm seeing the presenter version.
That's annoying. Okay.
So maybe you can if you're on a Mac, maybe you can just undo it and then zoom in on that screen.
Let me do this. Here we go. Undo it, stop share. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, and if I do play from current slide, how about now? No.
Yep. Nope, there
Yeah.
you go.
Good.
It's
Okay,
still the presenter version, but it's
good.
okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
We're
it's
just
okay. Can you,
All right.
maybe you can zoom in? Can you like do the, if you're on a Mac, can you either Command plus or Control? It's okay. You can kind of see it.
Okay.
Or you could for sure zoom in on this slide actually in the bottom corner. You see how it says 80% in the
Yeah.
bottom part of PowerPoint? Just,
There we go.
yeah, perfect.
Hopefully this works.
Yep, this is good.
All right. So this is the zoomed in version when someone has not scheduled, and it's just a series of emails, and it says, send an email, and it's, wait 1 day. And then what happens is if they click on things, they get one version. If they don't click on things, they get another version. Every single one of these, since this isn't working, I'm going to pop out of it, but every single one of them gives them the ability to say, click here to schedule a consultation. I also give them away a free book. I also link them to free courses online on things like how to represent yourself online, or not the how to represent yourself online, but how to represent yourself, a series that's free through I Do Over. I give them information about the low cost firm that's I Do Over. So I just want to give information and be valuable and be in front of them. We also have a podcast we recently started. And so that's part of our newsletter that we send out twice a week to absolutely everyone. And it just keeps people engaged. We ask them if they want to share their story and be on the podcast. And we share stories for people that are people like them who went through divorce. Also, we have experts on the podcast to talk about things like, maximizing spousal maintenance or valuing, personal goodwill in a business. So just as much content and engagement as we can get with people is what we try to do.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think so many people make the mistake of just saying, hey, why aren't you buying me? Why aren't you signing up? Why aren't you signing up? Here, sign up, sign up, sign up. But like really what you have to do is you have to provide value, and you have to create, and you have to build yourself up as an authority figure. If they see you have a podcast, they see you have a webinar, they see you have all this content, they know that you're more than just a shell, which is a lawyer, right? You are an advisor who knows divorce inside and out, and they can trust you. And again, like we talked about this on this last webinar, which is the number one reason why people decide to or to not hire a lawyer is based on trust. And that comes from interactions, it comes from authority, and it comes from just the exact thing that you said earlier, which is trust, which is how do you get them to be comfortable with you? And that consultation should largely gear towards it. So awesome. So we're going to wrap up here. We're respectful of Billie's time because it's $250 an hour. So unless you're going to send her a check right now, we're going to stop right here. Thank you so much, Billie. This was incredible. It was so much fun. I could keep doing this for hours. So maybe we'll do another follow-up another time and go a little bit deeper. But hopefully you guys got some good tidbits on how to optimize your conversion rate for your leads, how to make sure better leads are entering your funnel. And hopefully you can beat Billie at her own game, which is going to be tough to do. She's very good at what she does. So thank you, Jocelyn, as well. And thank you everyone for attending. And we will see you next time.